Today I'm going to show you how I decorated this peanuts cake featuring Snoopy. Come join me. So I started a few days in advance working on getting these characters prepared. So I used some edible images and I printed off all of the characters, printed off for some of them multiple of the characters because I was going to put them around the entire cake. So I printed them out and then used an X-Acto knife and cut them out. And I'm going to then put these onto a piece of fondant, and again I'll be putting these onto the sides of the cake. So around each one of these, I'm leaving a little bit of white space around the outside of the characters. And then when I'm putting these onto the fondant, I will do the same thing. Around the bottom of the edges of each one of these cakes, it is going to be a two-tier cake. I'm going to put these racing stripes around the bottom. And again, I'm going to be putting these onto a piece of fondant. So, for this, I'm going right up against the edges of the racing stripes, and I will leave some white space around the outside of these. This is my Snoopy topper. This is going to be on the very top of the cake, and he's going to be on a thicker piece of fondant, which you can see right here, because I do want him to be able to stand independently on the top. So it will not be able to be flimsy at all. So it has to be nice and thick. So I'm adhering this using a little bit of water. And then I'm going to use some skewers and kind of put them in the bottom of this piece of fondant and let it dry so that when the cake is done, I can put it into the cake so that it's nice and sturdy and it's not going to go anywhere. So again, I'm kind of going around the outside of this and leaving a little bit of white space around the outside. Then I'm using my fingers just to smooth out the outside of the topper so that it's nice and smooth. So it looks nice. Here I am adding those skewers and then cutting them down a little bit. And now I'm going back to those characters and I'm using a little bit of water here, and I'm going to put these characters all along this piece of thinner fondant. And then again, I'm going to go back and I'm going to cut these out using an X-Acto knife. I'm also using these little bubbles, these thought bubbles, with some music notes. Some of them are blank, some of them are filled with music notes, just to kind of fill in some of the blank space as I'm working on decorating the cake. So after I put these onto pieces of fondant, I'm going to put them onto these paper plates and into a bag because I want them to stay pliable. So when I'm putting them onto the cake, they're still flexible. So they wrap around the curve of the cake. That's different than the Snoopy that's going onto the top, as well as a Woodstock character, the little bird that hangs out with Snoopy, because I want those to be really firm so that they stand on top of the cake. I'm also going to put these racing stripe borders into a bag because I want them to be flexible when I put them onto the cake as well. So with these racing stripes, I'm making enough of these to go the entire way around each of the two tiers that this cake is going to be. As I mentioned, I'm going back and I'm cutting each of these out of this fondant, leaving a little bit of white space around the outside. Here I'm brushing a little bit of powdered sugar over the top of each one of the characters, and that's just to keep the knife from sticking to the characters as I'm cutting them out. That powdered sugar will then brush off of them. It does not damage the image or whatever as I'm decorating them, but it does make it a bit easier when I'm cutting them out. And here's my little Woodstock characters. One of these is going to go on the top of the cake with Snoopy, and now it's time for me to begin assembling the cake. So the customer for this wanted the bottom and the top, each of them to be half and half, half chocolate, half vanilla. So I made an 8-inch cake and I cut it in half, and I'm going to put this together here, and then I'm going to make a vanilla 8-inch and I'm going to cut it in half and stack it the same way I did this chocolate. I'm going to do the same thing with 6-inch cakes to put on top of this 8-inch cake, and that's how I'm going to achieve the half and half, half chocolate, half vanilla. So here I am just stacking these cakes, as you can see, stacked, and doing the crumb coat on the half chocolate 8-inch cakes. And I'm trying to crisp up those edges to really just make sure that we have some firm edges here. Now moving on to do the half chocolate 6-inch cake for the second tier. Just cutting that in half, and I'm going to stack and do the crumb coat for this cake. And we're doing the crumb coat for this 6-inch cake, as I mentioned. In between each of these, I'm just going to put these into the chiller for a little bit so that they can begin to crust over. And now moving on to do the same thing with the vanilla cakes for both the bottom 8-inch, and I'll do the same thing for the top 6-inch. And now that we have this just about finished, we're going to do the top layer here. We're getting closer to being able to actually do the fun part where we can decorate this cake. Right, so now I'm just kind of going back and filling in the gaps here where we have some blank space here. This cake is, as I mentioned, going to be a 2-tier cake. And here we are, we're going to put together the bottom 8-inch cakes now onto a heavier cake board. We're using a little bit of blue buttercream to kind of hold it still to put it together. So you can see this is a crusting buttercream, so I'm able to just pick this up and move the cake onto this board. It doesn't get ruined because the cake has been sitting for a bit, and it is a crusting buttercream. So here I am moving those cakes onto a shared cake board, and I'm going to use some icing and put it in between the two to help hold it together. And I'm going to, just cover it the same way that I would cover a normal cake. Only I'm going to add some extra icing into the center to hold it together. And now I'm going to do a crumb coat for this cake. I'm going to do the final coat for this cake. And now we're going to use our spatula and we're going to just try to smooth some of that off. And here we are using the bench scraper to smooth out that icing on the side. And I also want to make sure that I am cleaning off the top of this cake to get those tops nice and crisp. And you can see here I'm kind of pushing in and up so that I don't push that icing just down onto the cake over to the other side. So down and up to lift it up off of the cake. And I apologize for the noise that's coming into the video. I'm by a window so I can hear the traffic going by. And here we go, just kind of doing final touches to make sure that it's nice and smooth. Gonna do that kind of push of the top icing, like in and up to get it off of the cake. And here we are getting ready to prepare the top cake for this larger cake. So I'm putting those two halves together to make the top tier. So similar to the bottom tier, I'm using some icing to hold it down and also together. Then once I have both of them onto this board and they're pushed together, I'm going to crumb coat this the same way that I would do any other cake. And here we are trying to smooth out the side of this cake to get it nice and crisp. We're using the bench scraper to pull off some of that extra icing that's currently on the cake. Get some of those sides clear and fill in some of the divots that exist currently. And here we are too, doing that kind of down and up to get that excess off of the top of the cake without it being pushed around. Here I am, I'm using a 4-inch pan, and I'm just kind of pushing that into the bottom tier so I know where I'm going to put my straws. Here I've measured the straws and I'm cutting them off so I know how tall to make them. I'm going to put them right along this circle that I just made. So I made one so far, and now I'm going to measure others against that initial straw that I made. Once I have them all made, I'm going to, as I mentioned, I'm going to put them around that circle that I just created a few minutes ago. And here I am putting the first one in. I'm going directly across from it. And now I'm adding the others as well. Make sure this cake is nice and sturdy and not going to move around as the customer's driving with it. And there we go. So I'm putting a little bit of icing there so that I can put the top tier on top and it will stick. Now I am going to use some icing and put it along the bottom of, sorry, before I do that, I'm going to take a wooden skewer and put it the whole way through the entirety of this cake. So now we have the straws in the bottom to keep the top from caving in on it. And then this one is going to really structure the entire cake and hold it together. I'm going to push this even more so that it is going into the board at the bottom. Here I am using some of that blue icing to trace along the bottom so that we can get rid of this gap in the between the two cakes. Here I am using those racing stripes. I'm taking a bit of piping gel, and I'm starting at the beginning of the cake so that I don't see any seams in the beginning, and I'm just kind of putting them on the base of the cake, making sure that the bottom is touching the top of that bottom tier. And then from there, I'm just going to line it up equal to the one before it, and I'm going to wrap these around the entire cake as a border for both tiers of this cake. So here I am now taking those characters that we created earlier in the video. I'm using some piping gel and I am adding them to this cake. So if I put Charlie Brown on the top front of the yellow cake, I would put Charlie Brown on the bottom back of this same cake. I did that because I really wanted these characters to be mixed up well on the cake so that no matter where you're looking, you're not going to see the same character right across from you. And of course, I'm going to do this for all of the characters that I prepared. Then I'm just going to continue to add these on until I've filled up the whole cake. I'm also going to add the little bubbles that I mentioned. And then once I have all of these completed, including the small thought bubbles and the music notes, and all of that's on, I'm going to go to the top and I'm going to add that Snoopy and the Woodstock characters. And here we're going to add that. I'm adding a little bit of buttercream icing to the bottom of the Snoopy to help hold him into place. It should hold just fine without it, but just for an extra bit of assurance, that's why I'm adding that to this element of the cake. And here's our way of doing that outside of that, and that is to add some icing along the front and back and just to smooth that out, and that'll help to hold it in place. And lastly, we're adding our little Woodstock guy, and this is what our cake is going to look like. That ultimately wraps up what it looks like, aside from me writing happy birthday to the birthday girl, which is what I'm doing right here. So here is what the cake looked like. And if you enjoyed watching this video, I do encourage you to like, comment, share, and subscribe to my channel so that you don't miss any future content. Thank you for joining us.